Great to be here. Welcome. Thanks for attending, and thanks for the introduction, Lori. That was great. Um, I do want to make a brief distinction between the KBO planets that are officially declared as such by the astronomers. The IAU named because of the, discovery of Eris, there was a question mark, is this going to be the 10th planet, which is what I call the book that I wrote. And really, it was just the same kind of planet as Pluto, a little bit smaller than some of the others, quite small, quite far out there, even a larger orbit than as well. Let me put up the next slide, actually. Well, before I put up the next slide, I just want to make a distinction. So there are many KBOs out there, and astrologers have started working with them, and I applaud that. It's great to look into these things. I have concentrated on just these three because these three plus Pluto are the ones that are officially designated as dwarf planets of the Kuiper Belt, and of course there's Ceres as well, but which we know pretty well because it's an asteroid that we understand, one of the four feminine asteroids. These are the four KBO planets. And I like to distinguish them from asteroids because really there was no reason, as we know, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto planets. We've been using those in Western astrology for quite a while. Although it's interesting to point out that when Pluto was first discovered, it was not so much a popular item with astrologers. We've got everything we need. We've got the ancient planets through Saturn. We've got Uranus and Neptune, and we're pretty happy with all that. Well, of course, Pluto became very important in Western, as everybody knows. So I think we're looking at a similar fate. For these three planets, I found them to be extremely significant in charts, which was logical because really there's no distinction categorically between Eris and Pluto. I mean, they're about the same size in the Kuiper Belt, and I'll get to that in another slide. But really, there's no reason not to expect Eris to be important in charts, and a few astrologers have made that comment to me, and that it makes sense what I'm doing. So anyway, I wrote that book, and I was able to articulate the archetype as a feminine warrior. I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we do the slides? So the first slide I have for you is this setup. The moon is on the far left there to indicate size, and Ceres, which is smaller than the others, is the one that's in the asteroid belt, of course. But here we have those four. We have Eris, and Eris is in this generic slide marked first, slightly, I mean, probably not larger, but definitely brighter and more dense. Had we had the telescopes 250 years ago that we have now, we would have discovered it along with Pluto. But it's a 559-year orbit, and now it's at its aphelion, the furthest. And I can show you that as well. So the other two are a little bit smaller than Eris and Pluto, but also these are the four largest KBO items, and they're all officially designated as planets. So we have Eris, Pluto, Haumea, and Makemake. And here are the orbits. So you can see that red orbit of Eris. I think you can see my mouse if I put it on here. Yes. So that is the largest of the, it's a 559-year cycle. The orbital period for Haumea and Makemake, which are similar orbits, similar also orbital periods. Haumea being 284 years, Pluto's 248, Haumea is 284, and then Makemake is 309. So what we have is these are very similar in orbital period, and I find that there's a similarity in meaning as well, which we'll get to talking about that. So let's talk about Eris to begin with. That was the first one that I studied and wrote the book, and it's become accepted as the archetype. So a new planet. This was going to be the 10th planet, but then that would be, how many planets do we have? 12, no, 15, no, next year 25. So they didn't want all that discussion about which of these KBOs might be officially designated. And they wanted to go with a different designation, and they wanted to leave the word planet in there because they are officially planets, just the same as the ones we're more used to, the bigger ones. So they decided on dwarf planet, as everybody knows, including Pluto. And that was a big clue because Pluto we're still working with in charts. So why not Eris? So that's the background for these studies. And I do use the term KBO planet. In other words, not just a KBO, but they're designated officially as planets by the IAU. I've made that distinction because I do think it matters. These astronomers say, here's a planet, and then we astrologers start working with it to figure out what it means. So here we have the comparison, about the same size. Orbital period is quite different. And there they are, the pictures of them. All right, so astrologically, what do we have? And a feminine warrior is actually comes from the mythology. She was the sister of the god of war, followed him willingly into the battle, delighted in the groans of the dying. And of course, the other thing that comes from mythology is the story of the golden apple. Eris was left out of the wedding, rolled the golden apple that said to the fairest. There was a big fight amongst the goddesses. Who's the fairest? Paris was the one who was chosen to make that judgment. It's called the Judgment of Paris. That fragment of myth comes down to us, and people have made a lot of it with respect to Eris, and I have some things to say about that, but I don't regard that as the fundamental meaning that comes through, because to me, being the sister of the god of war and also a warrior, feminine warrior, that's where my starting point was, what is a feminine warrior? And I realized that a feminine warrior actually could have a distinction, also taking into account the depth. In other words, they're so far out. We've understood Pluto to be related to the soul, Jeff Green's work on that. And I felt like also this new discovery, which is so similar to Pluto in location, way out there, would also go to depth within the psyche. And so I came to this idea that in addition to saying, as we do say, as above, so below, that we also might be able to say, in terms of psychological astrology, as furthest out, so deepest within. And that's proven true with all of these, I think. They do go to a fundamental depth within the psyche, which, of course, Jung was the first one, Jung and Freud, in the beginning of the 20th century, the first ones that were able to articulate that there was this huge, vast, unconscious part of each human that we were only beginning to recognize. And that has come along with these discoveries, Pluto in 1930, of course. So here's a book I wrote, The 10th Planet. And so, as I started to say, when I started to consider a feminine warrior, I considered that different from a masculine warrior in the sense that it would be for deep need. In other words, there might be many reasons for a masculine warrior for just bragging rights, ego, money, defending territory, so many reasons for that kind of warrior. And this, I felt a feminine warrior would be for deep purpose. In other words, it could be a perfectly innocent mother with a bread knife in her hand, and there's an intruder and the life of her child is threatened. She might strike with a knife where she wouldn't be this bloodthirsty person until the moment came when she really had to. And so that's the basis of the starting point. And then I did all this research, chart after chart after chart, and I really began to see the outline of the archetype, and I wrote that book, and it's been pretty well accepted now as feminine warrior for deep purpose, and I'll show you more about that in the next slide. So just the idea that Eris doubles, again, the former limit of the planets was 248 years, Eris goes to 559. And here is, I do have some clues for how to interpret Eris in charts because I've worked with it so long. And the idea about this, and I'll give this as an outline, and then you can keep it in mind as we go through these example charts I have. By the way, I have tons of example charts. I have, too many, but on the other hand, I wanted to try to show the archetypes, especially these other new ones, Haumea and Makemake, to really give you a feel for what they might mean, how they might be interpreted, be able to be interpreted in chart work. So I'll probably skim some of the example charts. I'll just have to go fast, but I'm going to make the PDF of these slides available also. So when you're reviewing later, or if you want to go back to it, you will have the charts to look at. So what I found with Eris is that the house that it occupies is an important house just from Eris being there. And I wrote these house interpretations up. which are published in the 10th planet, and they're also in the TimePassages software. When you can click on anything in the natal way with all of these 3 planets now, and get an interpretation either for the house position or with the aspects with other planets. So what I found with Eris is that it really, really makes that house significant. And the write-ups I wrote for the Eris and the houses have been pretty well accepted this is a good statement about myself. And so with the planets also, each one it becomes sort of illuminated in this way of depth, in this way of soul connection. I feel like it's a feminine word in support of soul intention, our deepest intention for ourselves. Finding meaning in life is very important, and that relates to Eris. So with the sun, I say a strong stand for themselves and their values magnifies whatever planet. So the sun, of course, it's very important that way. You see a lot of feminists, like Gloria Steinem, for example, has the conjunction Sun Eris. Now, with the moon, I found that not only would it be an emphasis on the lunar features, motherhood, nurturing, child's self, not rational so much as the Gestalt, more viewpoint, but also it's a way of seeing things from that Gestalt viewpoint. So I also call it thinking outside the box. And I found that with Eris and the moon, many times these paradigm shifters like Copernicus and Galileo have that, and Newton. So with Mercury, I always say, "Oh, you're a writer," and many times they say that. Yes, I do. I write all the time. Sometimes they say I've always wanted to. And then with Venus, that's the appreciator of this maverick personality that goes against the grain, as represented by strong Eris. So because of Venus being the appreciator, it does come that way. And a good example of that is Anais Nin, who was the lover of Henry Miller, who was quite a character, of course, and the defender, one of the first defenders of D.H. Lawrence, who represented a kind of a counter current to the prevailing mores in the early 1900s. So then with Mars, we would have definitely a strong sexuality. You see many times sort of multiple relationships, known womanizers, Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, both have the Mars trine Eris. And there's also a can-do attitude, bringing out strong Mars. With Jupiter, I say a sense of optimism is there, the willingness to take a chance, even if it breaks the rules. Natives that are usually well liked because they have that kind of optimistic savoir-faire kind of a feeling. And with Saturn, an attitude of fairness. Now, Saturn really represents the social contract, Capricorn. And the highest way of looking at that is that it protects everybody. That's what the social network or the social fabric of our society is all about. And what I find with these Eris Saturn people is defending the underdog, that sense of fairness, like everybody has to have a fair break here. And that's pretty characteristic as well. And I'll just mention that the other planets would be emphasized in that similar way. So to get some examples here, here's Angelina Jolie, who is a really good example of Eris. One reason I say that is because, let's look at the chart. Here she's got Venus on the ascendant, Jupiter at the midheaven, one of the best paid actresses in the world in her heyday, a beautiful woman, and could have been any kind of actress, but yet always took these roles, these kind of challenging roles, these roles that have you saw the picture with the 2 guns. She was also in that movie, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where they were machine gunning each other from the corners of the living room because of CIA connections or something. Over and over again, she plays this warrior role. And what we find when we look at her Eris position is in the Gugulan sector, just before the beginning of the 10th, the 9th house, she has this triple conjunction of Eris, Moon, and Mars. So Eris, in that sense of being elevated like that near the top of the chart, makes sense as a warrior. And of course, having Mars there too, as a warrior role that she would adopt. And so that was very interesting to me initially. And then, there was that incredible, difficult decision that she made for the double mastectomy because she had the cancer gene. She didn't want to deprive her children. And by the way, she was a very fierce mother. Eris with the moon bringing out that mother in the ninth house of foreign connections. She adopted from all over different third world countries. And she didn't want to deprive those kids of her mother as she was deprived of her mother who died of breast cancer. So she decided to take that precautionary step of not having the chance for breast cancer to take her out. And she made that decision while Eris, which had moved along, was in the 10th house at that point, was sort of between, we're not sure exactly when the whole thing came down, but it was between the Jupiter and the Chiron. And Jupiter Chiron is, of course, a decision that's difficult, that goes against, that's painful, that may go against other people's beliefs. It's a question of your beliefs and what you can do about that. And having Eris there, that decisiveness. So that's a very interesting example, really, of Eris in life. Looking at another example, and she's iconic. This is Angela Davis. She's iconic for the fact that I couldn't find a feminist leader from the last couple hundred years. That was a very strong movement to get rights for women, to get voting rights, to get the recognition that, hey, we're people, by the way. We can do, they finally said, we can do anything a man can do. We just do it differently or slightly differently, or, we have our humanity that we have to stand up for. And that was a very strong stand that they had to take. And so she's kind of representative. I'm not going to bring all the feminist charts in, but they're in the 10th planet, the book. But anyway, so in her case, it's very interesting because she was a revolutionary, as you may know. Maybe you don't, but she was back in the 60s. She was definitely in favor of armed rebellion, if necessary, to get Black rights, to get the rights for people and for women as well. And she has the sun. You can see, let's see if I have another chart. Nope. So she has the sun at 5 degrees of Aquarius near the top of the chart, and it is in a close trine with Uranus at 4 degrees Gemini, and at the midpoint we find Eris. So in other words, Eris, by being at the midpoint of that Sun-Uranus trine with Mars there too, brings out that revolutionary spirit to the nth degree and makes it more so her sole intention, what she's here for. And all her life she's been like an iconoclast. That she's a professor at she was at Santa Cruz at the UCSC. Anyway, a particularly strong revolutionary person in her youth, especially advocating violence is necessary. So it makes a good example chart to see the kind of thing I'm talking about that verb, that spirit that comes with a strong position of Eris. Now, as far as Jung goes, he's a good example too. Um, he has Eris with the moon, which I've mentioned is with paradigm shifters. He was definitely seeing things from a different perspective, being able to identify the unconscious and bring it forward. And he has it with Mercury. So at 13 degrees of Pisces, is Mercury being at 13 degrees of Cancer. So very close trine. So what do we say about Eris Mercury? Well, he lectured in 3 languages. He wrote all the time. His collected works come to 18 volumes. And toward the end of his life, as he got involved in alchemy, it was the spirit Mercurius that he spoke of quite a bit as being representative of that study of his. So very interesting with the Mercury. And I won't dwell on his chart. There's more to talk about with his chart. But I'll get to that in the next section. So what about Einstein? So Einstein also, we find Eris with the moon. Eris is at 14 Pisces, the moon at 14 Sag, so perfect square. And he did have some feminine character. He was always with a partner his whole life. But also, I think, when he brought forward the theory of relativity, there were thought experiments that he made, like chasing a beam of light. There's a way he was thinking from a different perspective of it. It wasn't just pure logic that gave him that perspective to see relativity as a possibility. And to my great surprise, when I studied the transits of Einstein, which I just launched into by chance in a way. I just started, well, what would happen when it got closer to his sun, because it is, about 6 degrees away. So it turns out, I think it was 1899 when it got within 1 degree. And then over the next several years, he developed those really remarkable ideas of his. And it turns out that on the day that it stationed direct on his sun, moved backward to his sun, stationed direct on his sun, and then moved on. That was what I thought was the prime year, and I didn't even understand that that was a big year in his biography. But 1905 is considered his annus mirabilis, they call it, when he actually, there were 5 papers, photoelectric effect, he won the Nobel Prize for, Brownian motion, all these things, including the beginnings of relativity, all in that year, which was when Eris was really on his sun degree. So I thought that was quite fascinating, actually. And by the way, same thing applies to Newton. So Newton, who had Eris conjunct the moon at 2 degrees of Cancer, close, partile conjunction. Also, I looked at one transit for Newton, and it was the transit, I don't think I have it here, but it was the transit when he first gave the information to the Royal Society at the urging of Edmund Halley, the astronomer, said, you've got to get this information to people about your inverse square law and the nascent law of gravity, for which he's kind of best known. So that was published in the Royal Society on a lunar eclipse at, I think it was 1 degree of Cancer. So right on his Eris moon conjunction. So I thought that was very interesting for him. And I'm just kind of skimming through these charts. We could spend more time on each chart, but like I say, I don't have time to go over all of them like that, since the time is fleeting here. So here's Copernicus. Also, not only there is an Eris moon connection, which is a sesquiquadrate, but he's also got this yod to Eris from Pluto and Neptune. I thought that was so interesting because Pluto and Neptune were conjunct in 1400. And then again in 1900, they kind of indicate a 500-year period of a great shift in the way we think. And of course, in Copernicus's time, and he was born in 1470 or so, it was the shift from an Earth-centered system, which of course he's famous for bringing forward the idea, and it was a spiritual concept for him, that the sun was the center and the sun was the source of life and so on. And anyway, he didn't publish until his deathbed. It was not okay with the church. The church said, well, in the Bible, it says very clearly Joshua, with the Battle of Jericho, commanded the sun to stand still, and the sun moved. Obviously, the sun moves. But anyway, as you know, that was quite a struggle as the 1400 era the Middle Ages continued to unfold, and that worldview changed, and the whole scientific principle became, the idea of science came about in Western culture. But so that's quite interesting too, some of these. And it was actually between Pluto, Neptune, and Eris. Neptune itself is at 18 degrees, the same degree, so it's a partile in conjunct to Eris with his chart. Now here's another iconoclast, D.H. Lawrence. If you know much about him, he wrote in the early 1900s about relationships between men and women in a way that nobody had ever done before, about the actual sexual connection and what happens in the bedroom. Also, the fierce competitiveness, which can be almost violently deadly at times, between people, which gets to that Eris as a warrior. And when you look at his chart, which forget how I came upon his chart. I think I thought he would have a strong Eris, and then you can see it's quite strong because it's apart from the other planets, Eris being down here in this chart, and also exactly opposed to his Sun Jupiter conjunction, opposed to the midpoint of 17, and in a T-square with Chiron also. So that kind of matches what we know about his work, that he was able to bring these more difficult things to light, that he was able to go against the grain and bring things forward that people maybe needed to hear. Maybe it was the time to bring that up before the First World War. It was and he wrote Sons and Lovers, The Rainbow, Women in Love, and then later Chadwick's Lover he was famous for again just bringing these things forward that were not really talked about. So he's a great example chart as well. And I mentioned that Anais Nin has that close Eris-Venus conjunction. Well, what I saw there was that she was very familiar with and wanting to go along with that and praise that and value that iconoclastic tendency in people, including she praised D.H. Lawrence, one of the first people to do so. And then it's very interesting with Neal Cassady. Neal Cassady was this cultural figure of the 50s, the Beats. He was friends with Jack Kerouac. He was friends with Allen Ginsberg as well. And interestingly, there was kind of a menage a trois with Carolyn Cassady, his wife, who was born April 28th, 1923, and has Eris-Venus conjunction, you see. And then if you look at Cassady's chart, he has the Eris Mars precise square, a partile square at 29 degrees of Pisces and 29 degrees of Sag. And of course, he was this quintessential masculine, overly masculine figure. He'd go out for a pack of cigarettes and go over to his other wife across town, and was known multiple orgasms a day, and just both with men and he was a bisexual person. He was also Jack Kerouac's lover, and what Carolyn Cassady said about Jack's position within, I mean, they were all three friends in many ways, but also the focus was Neal. She said, well, with Jack, it was always about Neal, just as it was with me. And with Jack Kerouac, we do find he has that at 29 degrees also, that precise partile Eris Venus. So that's another, these are kind of iconic examples to just show you what there is there, how significant it is. Now, if we look at Paul Watson, who was, it was an offshoot of Greenpeace called Sea Shepherd, where they were actually trying to kind of mess up the whaling boats. They were trying to protect the whales. And his chart, now, by the way, I forgot to mention, but I have been using these new archetypes besides your Haumea and Makemake. And I've just been leaving them in the charts so you can go back and look at them later if you wanted to see where those were. And I do use slightly different glyphs than the ones that you saw in the description of the talk, which are also, these are alternate glyphs. This is intended to look a little bit like a pregnant woman, a little bit like the Pluto glyph. They're called Plutoids in some astronomy circles. They are similar in the orbit of Pluto. Pluto's 248, Haumea is 284, and Makemake is 309. So they're kind of similar orbits in that same category. And I just thought, well, if we have a glyph that looks a little bit more like Pluto, but it changed the chalice. I changed the chalice to have one part of it upside down. And it's intended to resemble a pregnant woman. I'll explain that when I get to that pretty soon here. And then this is the Makemake glyph. So I just wanted to mention, you'll see those glyphs in these charts. I was going to say that at the outset and I forgot. But basically with him, trying to remember now, yeah, Eris is pretty strong in his chart, and he was kind of this iconoclastic figure that went against the grain in what he did. And quite interesting is that as the transit chart, this is the transit chart for when Sea Shepherd was founded in June of 1977. And you can see that in the sky, he has 14 degrees of Sag in his chart, his Venus position. And then 14 degrees of Sag was also Neptune in the sky. Eris at 14 degrees, a grand trine in fire, Eris at 14 degrees, and also Saturn at 14 degrees. And Saturn with Eris, I associate with defending the underdog, and they were defending the whales, and then Neptune, of course, the sea. So it's this perfect grand trine in the sky when on the founding of Sea Shepherd. I just thought was so interesting. And then also interesting that it touches his chart. We don't have his time. This is a sunrise chart. So maybe Venus could be like a chart ruler of some kind. And then maybe the midheaven ruler, who knows? But the other thing is, Haumea in the sky that day was also at 14 degrees. I discovered this later. I was like, whoa. So I thought that was interesting. And you'll see what I have to say about Haumea in a minute. We'll get to that. As far as Brexit goes, I was trying to get a bet down. I was able to see that Brexit was happening. The transits for the vote on Brexit, this is the UK chart from 1801 that's in Campion's book, the World Horoscopes book. And it has at 23 degrees of Leo, Saturn. The reason that that's significant is because at 23 degrees of also Aries was this Eris Uranus conjunction, which was very important for that whole summer, which was still to come. I mean, this was the peak of it, obviously. And since, we have Eris and we have Uranus, both kind of revolutionary, very much emphasizing the revolutionary quality of the Uranus that was happening in the sky. In contrast, it's a trine with Saturn. And then on top of that, Mars at 23 degrees also of Scorpio, square that point, Mars retrograde, meaning do our own thing, forget about working with others. I really felt like when I saw this chart, oh my gosh, I just, nobody expected it, but I thought they're going to pull out. It's going to happen. And so I tried to get a bet down, but I couldn't achieve that. So that's kind of a mundane example. And then to bring up that same period of time, Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders, very interesting. He's like the Energizer Bunny. He's such a figure. He just keeps going. And he does have this strong connection at 5 degrees between Eris and Pluto. And I find that Eris and Pluto, invariably, they do have this kind of passion and strength. And, if they get their teeth into something, look out. They're just going to happen. It's going to happen. And the fact that also Eris is opposite is Mercury, and he's quite a strong figure in terms of articulation, in terms of writing. He's written a lot, and he talks a lot, and he's really articulate, and he really speaks up for the underdog, which would be Saturn. Forget if he does have Saturn. I think he might. Yeah, there is a connection also between, it's a septile, that's right, between Eris and Saturn. Anyway, so what I found, which interested me as well, besides just his chart, was when he declared for president. So here's the data, the transit data for when he declared for president, which was May 25th of 2015, the year before. And the funny thing is, we do have that was the incipient conjunction you see of Uranus and Eris in the sky. And Uranus is at 19 degrees of Aries. Eris is at 23. His Mars is at 23. His moon is at 19. And meanwhile, on that particular day that he did declare for president, the sun is at almost 5 degrees of Gemini, which aspects both ends of his Eris Pluto. So this was just kind of an interesting thing that I noticed with him, that how characteristic that was, how Eris is part of that whole configuration of when he declared, which was, after all, definitely part of his sole intention, part of his purpose. Why am I here? I'm here to try to make things better, try to go for more equality and better treatment of the average person instead of just the oligarchs, right? And then similarly, we have AOC. She's quite an interesting figure. At the age of 29, she was elected to Congress. And in her case, we do find very strong Eris, opposed to this Sun Mars at the top of the chart. And also, square to Chiron, and also trine the ascendant. So, it's very strong Eris. She is this strong figure, this warrior-like figure, that came along to Congress and wants to work for the common people. And what I have here is the transit for her primary victory. And it's quite interesting in the fact that Eris and Uranus, this was, I guess, 2018. Yes, so this was after the 2016 Uranus conjunction. But if you look at the midpoint of these two, it does come out right on her sun degree. So it's very interesting that was when that exact midpoint is almost to the minute opposed to her sun. And then also I have another transit chart because she joined the primary campaign of Bernie Sanders in 2016, which is how she got her start in politics. So I thought that was very interesting too, that oh, I think this is where the midpoint. Okay, that's where I was confused for a second. This is the midpoint where so forget what I said about the other chart, but for this midpoint between 17 and 22, that's exactly the midpoint for her sun degree when these were forming like that. So this is February 2016, and then later she went and joined the pipeline Standing Rock. She was up there, and that gave her a lot of political motivation too. And then she did win the primary and became part of Congress. So I saw this book title, and I thought that's so interesting for Eris, because the other thing is when the planet comes along, the zeitgeist responds, as we know, and in fact, or maybe it reflects the zeitgeist that's already happening. And in fact, women are absolutely much more common in their role. I mean, the suffrage happened, and then not only that, but women are more and more involved as in leaders in this country, in political situations, lawyers, everywhere you see. So many women are now participating, much different than it was in the 19th century. So what about the other two KBO planets? And so this is the other half of this to try to present how these will show up in charts. And what I came to find was that they represented profound connection to nature. And this again comes from the mythology. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But the beginning assumption was that, and for both of them, because they both are the only officially named planets that are from the indigenous culture. And there's a lot of ones that are, a lot of objects that are named out there. But these, like I say, I was focusing on the ones that are officially named by the IAU as a kind of planet. And so what I found was not only profound connection to nature in the sense of loving nature, loving animals and pets, recognizing that all creatures of the earth have a place. And we all, there's a way that we can just say, gee, we're all here, not just the humans, right? Which is a different thought. This 21st century is, I think, a time when we're beginning to recognize the whole Gaia principle as well from the late 1900s. And the idea that we have to defend the earth, that it's very important, our planet. So anyway, this connection to nature, I think, is really profound and powerful right now and does seem to match the mythology. And then I've been researching, I have tons of research on this. And what I came to was also, it's not only connection to nature, but a connection to sort of a natural impulse within for right action, for defending people's rights, for treating people the way you yourself would like to be treated. It's the golden rule, do unto others, like you would have others do unto you. And so right relationship, right action, telling the truth as a natural way of being, telling what you think is true and not lying, and a moral compass. So I just find that that's so important, both of these. And then Haumea, I do find has a natural charisma, more so maybe. And Makemake, on the other hand, has an activism to it, a practicality to it. Let's make something happen, not just in a contemplative way, or this is the way I am in the world, this is the way I can be, but in a more active way, like this is what we need to do. So that's what I find. This is the masculine archetype of the two. This is a feminine archetype. Well, I'll go into that. So that's the next slide. So what we have with Haumea in the Hawaiian mythology, the creation goddess of the Hawaiian mythology. And so she had a magic wand that could make food appear, which is the way it was in the jungle. There was so much food. She gave birth from many different parts of her body, her womb, her breasts, her hip, regenerated as a young woman again. So it's really a sort of a model for the natural process. Nature is always giving forth new forms, always the same, always renewed. And so what I realized much later was this whole idea of being kind and being in right relationship to others matches the aloha spirit of the Hawaiian Islands, interestingly. And also, Haumea was a very special goddess to the Hawaiian, original Hawaiian culture, I talked to an elder of the Hawaiian people, and I asked him that question, and he said, "Oh, we think of Haumea as everything, as the land, the sea, the sky, everything." So I really felt like it was a good reflection of nature from the mythology. And incidentally, it's got an elongated shape. This is a little exaggerated, but it's got an elongated shape from its uh, fast rotation, which is similar to the shape-shifting qualities of the mythology itself. Now, as far as Makemake, that was the culture of Easter Island, and it was associated with fertility. It was the creation god of the Easter Island people, and they had this ritual where they would bring the first egg of the season back to the assembled tribe, and they'd have to go through all these difficulties, swim a strait between their island and this rocky landmass where the terns would come and lay their eggs. And if they could bring back the first one to bring back the egg would be a young champion for an elder that would become the Birdman for the culture. So this is the way I really feel like the cycles of nature are very much part of course, most indigenous societies as well. But for these two archetypes to come along and very similar orbits as well, I just find that they both seem to have this quality of connection to nature. So what I have as the Eris archetype, feminine warrior, warrior for soul intention. With strong Eris, find where your deepest values lie and then go for it. That's what the lesson is, to discover those parts of yourself that are the fundamental things, the things you cannot not do. And that's what Eris is all about. It's so important for our times. And then with Haumea, and I've done this glyph that suggests a pregnant lady, as I mentioned. And then the other glyph for Makemake is kind of resembles a birdman, which is there in their culture. And this was suggested by astrologer Philip Sedgwick, by the way. But for Haumea, we have profound connection to nature, feminine goddess, and the creation goddess of Hawaii, softer approach, appreciator of the natural world, and celebrating the fecundity of life, charisma, connection to source, loves animals very much, and just can't not tell the truth also. Right action, right relationship, truth telling. And with Makemake, very similar, right action, right relationship, truth telling, and tends to be more activist. So either on earth issues, climate change, or social issues, has that pragmatic part to themselves. So they're similar in the way they seem to be, at least as far as the research that I've done thus far. And we have to return to the chart of Carl Jung, because what he has in addition to the Eris position, which we talked about before, is you can see he has also Eris connects to the moon, as I mentioned, but between the moon and Pluto, we have Haumea, and Haumea is actually all over the chart. There's a yod from Jupiter and Mars. It connects to the sun and Uranus as well in two different aspects, and it connects to his Venus, Mercury, and it is a square to Saturn as well, close square. So it really is important in his chart. And I began to realize that some of what he did really responds to this sense of there's a depth component to ourselves that is connected to nature, that's kind of the way, he was exploring that part of the human condition. And here's a quote from him about how he felt he was part of nature, which is an amazing quote, which is, the quote goes, "It is the truth, a force of nature that expresses itself through me. I am only a channel. I can imagine in many instances where I would become sinister to you. For instance, if life had led you to take up an artificial attitude, then you wouldn't be able to stand me. Because I am a natural being, by my very presence, I crystallize, I am a ferment. The unconscious of people who live in an artificial manner senses me as a danger. Everything about me irritates them. My way of speaking, my way of laughing, they sense nature." So that's a great quote, right? And then I started to investigate also the chart of Friedrich von Schelling. He was a precursor, thought to be a precursor of Jung. He was called a nature philosopher. He was writing in the early 1800s. And when I went to look at his chart, because he said the subjectivity of man is part of nature. So he was kind of on a similar wavelength to Jung later, and is considered a philosophical predecessor. Well, I was looking for Haumea in the chart, and you can see what I found. Conjunct the moon, we have the time of birth, conjunct the moon in the first house, and then really connects to everything. His Eris is at, so that's at 6 degrees. His Eris is at 7 degrees. His sun is at 7 degrees. He has an 8 degree Chiron Saturn opposition, and that Haumea position is also quintile to Jupiter. I'm sorry, Neptune, to Neptune at the top of the chart. So it's all over the chart, Haumea, and I felt like that was so powerful in the sense that he was considered, he was trying to bring in that other side. So what I've found in my research, and it's very profound, I think, is that while we have a logical, the world is logical, the world yields to scientific method. We have all the advancements, of course, in technology as well as the medical advancements. But what we're neglecting in this period of which has become a very materialistic period is we're neglecting that other side, that faith side, that side of recognizing that there is a mystical component to this life, which, by the way, astrology illustrates. We can't be astrologers and work with this stuff without realizing that it really flies in the face of pure, just logical connection. There's more to life than simple logic dictates. The quote comes to mind from Hamlet: more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. And, you know, it really is true that there's this other side that's so neglected. It used to be that we had models of faith that took us forward. You know, the Christian faith was one, and all these fundamental religious things are kind of in the rearview mirror at this point because we've gotten so far advanced in our thinking and our rational thought process, but we haven't had a similarly robust development of our understanding of the mystical side. And I think that's where astrology is so valuable, that we can bring forward this thing. How can you have just the planet in the sky in its orbit, and yet you look at the chart and it tells us about Aphrodite? You know, it's this mystical connection between the planets and their angles and connections to each other and our life and the life of the unconscious within us too, and our psyche in general. Um, so I think that's so important to recognize and to, and he was one of the first to enunciate, you know, he was, Hegel was all about logic and dialectic, and he was a little bit a critic of Hegel, uh, presenting what he called the absolute, which is this other side of things, that there is this just what is, you know, you could call it God, you could call it the universe, we do. You could call it goddess, whatever you choose to call it, there is this mystical side to life. So now let's indulge in a little poetry. This is Mary Oliver, nature poet. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Now, I think you can see, to me, that the motivating factor behind this is very much what I was talking about, the mystical side, the belonging to nature and belonging to the world in a way that pure logic doesn't really talk to. And Mary Oliver's portrait or rather photograph. And here's the chart. And we don't have the birth time. However, we do have Mercury with aspect to Haumea. Sorry, let me study the chart here for a second. Well, the opposition between Eris and Mercury is kind of wide, but we also have Haumea connecting to that, I think. Let's see. Yeah, Haumea is actually sextile to Mercury. And then there's also that midpoint between these two is matched by also Makemake. It's about 7, or no, 646. That's what it is. So the midpoint between Eris and Mercury is 646, and her Makemake is also right on that midpoint. So it all kind of ties together with the writing. Um, and there's a septile between Haumea to Chiron and Saturn and Uranus as well. So anyway, she does have Haumea on the chart, as we would expect because of her position. And in fact, I started looking at nature poets in general. Oh, and I wanted to mention that, so there's somebody, I don't have the chart here, but there's somebody in Santa Cruz that is a neighbor of mine who has written a book. The first poetry book she wrote was about how a tree feels waking up in the morning, all these things about nature. Connection to nature is her thing, and she's written now 3 books of poetry also about this. And what I found with her was that she had the square between Haumea and Mercury, and it was to the minute. It was not only partile, but to the minute. So I wanted to bring up nature poets as part of this. This is another poem of Mary Oliver's, and this really illustrates Eris in a certain way. I guess I'll do this poem too. Just love the poetry, so I'll try to include this. It starts out, one day you finally knew, and it's not on the writing here, this is before this. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. The whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. This is again Mary Oliver, called The Journey. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. And this is Eris. This is what Eris is all about, is finding what you have inside yourself that you uniquely have, and that's what you have to do, and finally doing that which you just have to do, and saving the only life you can save. Oh, this is another poet named Joy Harjo. And she wrote a book called The Poet Warrior, which got me interested. And she's an amazing woman. She's was the poet laureate of the United States 3 times in a row. She's a Native American. She comes from the Southwest, from the Pueblo people. And Haumea is very strong in her chart as well, as you would expect, because of these nature poets. She writes beautifully in both prose and verse about understanding the life of the robin and things like that. And it's just a great amalgam that she makes of both her story as coming up in a distressed portion of the country, the population of the American Indians, and then also that connection to nature that she's so clear about, recognizing the message of the owl and stuff like that. So another good example with their strong Haumea. This is William Wordsworth, considered a nature poet. And here it's very interesting because not only does he have Haumea, but he also has strong Makemake. Makemake is conjunct the ascendant, you can see, close grand trine with Mercury Chiron and with Saturn, biquintile Sun, quincunx Venus, quintile Neptune. And the thing with Wordsworth, he was kind of a founder of a movement. He was kind of important in society. He wasn't just a wandering poet that was off on his own. But I believe that this is to illustrate that Makemake also comes in with the same kind of symbolism. I find that he's such a strong nature poet, so many beautiful paeans to nature that he wrote. And yet the Makemake seems to be the stronger of the two. And he was a very practical person. Now, Robert Frost is also very practical, and Makemake is part of his makeup too. As a nature poet, he's famous for using nature all the time, but he always has a point to it. He comes along and says, "Well, what's the point of this in terms of philosophy?" It comes to a sort of philosophical punchline at the end of his poems. And so, to me, that has a Makemake flair to it because he's kind of saying, "What's the practical uh, outcome of this? How can we apply this?" So I think that's very interesting for seeing that distinction as well. Here is Isadora Duncan. And she in the early 1900s they were all wearing very tight clothing and it was very formalized, ballet. And she brought a dance that she felt related more to the ancient Greeks and the loose tunics that showed her form. So she was very iconoclastic in her time and was considered the founder of modern dance, actually. And she has this grand cross with beginning with, let's see, I think it might be easier if I do this one, beginning with Haumea and Pluto in conjunction opposite the moon, but the Grand Cross goes to Mars opposite Uranus. So Mars for movement, Uranus for new ideas, new invention. The moon, really beautiful because she does so much share um, what her whole process is. Wrote this book about her life. She's a really amazing person, the connection she had with poetry, with life, as well as her art. And her art was to do dance to these beautiful classical pieces in a way that really brought the piece out. And, she was very famous in her day as a dancer, world famous. And it's interesting that she does have Haumea so directly involved in that Grand Cross. Oh, this is, do you recognize this picture? It's pretty iconic, nature photographer, Ansel Adams, who looks like a proto-hippie. Looks like he might have been a psychedelic explorer, although I don't know that he was. He turns out to have this, as part of this sort of generational conjunction of Haumea with Neptune, which is images, connects to his sun degree, which is 0 degrees of Pisces. So that's a perfect trine to the Haumea. And Makemake is also involved in his thing. And it turns out he was also kind of an activist about the environment. He used his nature photography in some cases to show how the nature is being despoiled by man's activities. So he has both of those things going on. I bring up Timothy Leary because at one point I started exploring the charts of psychedelic explorers. And so in all cases, I found a strong Haumea. Let me see if I can demonstrate it with him. So Haumea is trine Mercury and Venus within 1 degree. Oh, 1 degree of their midpoint. The Mercury-Venus conjunction is up here. Um, so that trine is not quite as strong as it might be, but the 24-degree mark is right on the midpoint of these two. And then connects to a sun degree, which is a square, and just connects to a lot of planets. And I keep finding it. So, these people, I'm thinking of Timothy Leary, I'm thinking of Ram Dass, I'm thinking of, well, I'll show you the charts. But they were trying to explore a side of nature and a side of deep psychology that wasn't being explored. So this whole psychedelic movement, which is so characteristic of the 60s, of course, was kind of important in that way that they were really bringing forward another way of looking at things that was more illogical, and mystical, and they had the mystical connection. And as you know, Timothy Leary, who was the Harvard professor pictured to the left there, became Ram Dass, a much more joyful figure as a result of his studies with Neem Karoli Baba, his guru, in India. And he also has pretty strong Haumea in his chart, and Makemake quintile sun and square the MC as well. And then here's Kenkisi, and he also has Haumea pretty well, and Grand Trine, it looks like, with Mars at 0 degrees, Mars midheaven, and with Eris at 3 degrees of Aries, and that those are both trine his 8 degree position. But it also connects to the personal planets, which you would expect bringing it out. We do have his time. So anyway, that's another strong Haumea. So I keep finding strong Haumea with this characteristic, those psychedelic explorers, including, by the way, Albert Hoffman, who famously said, he wasn't just an inventor, a chemist, although it's more Makemake that he has. And he says, by observing natural scientific discovery through a perception deepened by meditation, we can develop new awareness of reality. So this is, again, exploring these other factors in reality besides the purely logical. And then the quote is, the rapid rise of drug use, which had its beginning in this country in the 1960s, was not, however, a consequence of the discovery of LSD, as superficial observers declared. Rather, it had deep-seated sociological causes: materialism, alienation from nature through industrialization and increasing urbanization, lack of satisfaction in professional employment as a mechanized, lifeless working world, ennui and purposelessness in a wealthy, saturated society. So, in other words, this exploration goes beyond just understanding nature as an important part of life, but recognizing that that's kind of a missing component of our life, that we're really missing that. Here's a picture of Terence McKenna. Interesting story because I was lecturing in San Francisco. I hadn't looked at his chart, and somebody raised their hand and said, what about Eris with Terence McKenna's chart? Have you looked at that? And I thought, no. I said no. But I said, but there's no reason why we shouldn't look at that chart, because he was such an iconoclastic person, totally articulated his own vision, very forcefully articulated his own vision in his own way, saw things in psychedelics, but saw things also in terms of, he thought that human evolution was fostered by perhaps psilocybin spores contained in asteroids that had landed on the Earth or something. That was one of his things. But, he was just, again, sort of this iconoclastic person that talks about the other side of things, the possibilities that are not just the run of the mill. And sure enough, he does have Eris very strong. It's in this hemisphere by itself. It connects to his Mercury Mars. There's the trine to the Mercury Mars conjunction in his first house. So anyway, a good example. And oh, by the way, has strong Haumea as well. I think maybe there's a slide for that. This is the Haumea connection, and then also Makemake, I think, connects to things. So he has both. So I just keep finding it in these. Now here's another one. This is Fritjof Capra. He wasn't exactly a psychedelic explorer, but he was the one that wrote the Tao of Physics. So he was a modern quantum physicist who saw the connections between that and Eastern spirituality, brought that forward, the Tao of Physics, and then quite a few books that he wrote. And systems theory was his thing. So seeing the world as organically connected to each other, the parts are not able to be analyzed separately, but it's all part of the whole. So there again, just interesting what they're bringing forward, and the fact that they have, in his case, pretty strong Haumea. So I apologize for skipping through these examples so quickly. Here's Gregory Bateson, another systems theorist, another strong Makemake in his case. Evren Laszlo was another systems theorist, has it again. Joseph Campbell, great example. Now, this is a case where I found it in the chart first, and I wondered about that. He has this very strong triple conjunction, Joseph Campbell. Great lecturer, right? Great mythological explorer, and became an expert in the mythologies of the world, of course, on his own self-study. Anyway, has Jupiter, Mercury, and the Sun within about a degree in Aries, and then Haumea at 2 degrees of Cancer is trine that position. I'm sorry, square that position, and then conjunct also Neptune. So that is part of what he's up. So what he's up to, I've got a quote here. So this is a quote from they made a movie about him called The Hero's Journey. And this is some of there's a book that came out of that thing also. And you can read this quote. So I think the basis of this quote is just that, you can use nature as a model for what he said about mythology was that the purpose was to connect man and nature. So another good example of strong Haumea is connected to his teaching styles and things in the sixth house of service. Now, here we have Edward Abbey. And I have 15 minutes left before we do a question and answer period, which I don't want to skip. So I'm going to race through these charts again. Now, Edward Abbey, oh my God, he wrote this book called The Monkey Wrench Gang, which is we can't just stand by while the nature is despoiled by this development. We should sabotage the bulldozers. And they did a thing called the cracking of Glen Canyon Dam, which was they put this big plastic crack over the side of the dam so it looked like it was broken because they were opposed to the dam, which also filled in a whole valley that they didn't want to see it destroyed, become a lake, but that's what happened. But anyway, so he was an activist and he wrote all these books, quite a few books, and his connection with Makemake connects to Mercury, whereas Haumea doesn't. So that's kind of one evidence that Makemake seems to have this more activist streak in it. Oh, and this is an amazing guy, Obi Kaufman, who did this thing called the California Field Atlas, where he did all these illustrations himself. It became a pretty well-known book, surprisingly well-known, but he did it all kind of on his own, from his own drawing and from his own knowledge of the territory of California because he'd explored nature so thoroughly. So I was looking for in his chart, Haumea, and there it is. It's all over the chart. Greta, kind of an obvious example. Now, when I first saw Greta, here she is at the age of 15 addressing the UN and telling the leaders of the world they're screwing up. I knew she'd have strong Eris because she is a feminine warrior speaking truth to power, right? That she is. And I was at that point trying to figure out Makemake as well as Haumea. And Makemake is in a partile quincunx to her Eris, making a yod with Mars, you see. So that Mars Makemake sextile makes a yod to Eris. So not only is Eris strong, Eris is in a grand trine with Jupiter and Pluto. So very strong Eris, and maybe with the sun. We're not the sun is kind of wide, maybe with the moon as well, depending on the time she's born. But anyway, this characteristic with Makemake being again the kind of the activist, the doer. She's obviously a sort of quintessential environmental activist, wanting to see climate change, the atmospheric greenhouse gases, trying to see some changes there if we could change the behavior, which is of course a difficult thing. So, and then I had the transits for when she addressed the UN as well, which I won't go into because we have to speed along. So this is Rutger Bregman, who wrote a book called Humankind, about how the basis of human interaction is really kindness. So he was about this right action, right relationship. And in his case, it is a sunrise chart, but we do have this Uranus-Saturn conjunction in his chart that does correspond to the position of Makemake at 1 degree of Virgo, and also his sun degree at 6 degrees of Taurus. So it's a grand trine to the sun with this Uranus Saturn, which I think of as kind of a philosophical combination of planets. Now, with Adam Schiff, whatever you might think of him, he does seem to be about the truth. He does seem to be about opposing lies, trying to stand for the truth. And so I looked in his chart to see if I could find strong Haumea, and I did. And that's what happens a lot. I find it when I'm looking for it like this. I mean, we could go into more of the particulars. In his case, it's a very close opposition to Chiron, also a close trine to Mars, also connects to Saturn, which is defending the underdog, and to Jupiter. So anyway, that's the layout there. Again, we could go into these details more fully, and I apologize for racing through them, but I wanted to present a lot of examples so you could see what there are there's a lot of evidence for this view of these two new planets as nature planets. So here's Scarlett Johansson. And when looking at her chart, I was kind of surprised to see how strong Makemake was because I didn't think of her as an activist. But actually, here she is addressing the March on Washington. She is a bit of an activist as well. Here's another person, Liz Cheney, that you would think, oh, she would have strong attention to. She seems to be fighting for her principles, right? For truth. And she does have a very strong position of Haumea as well. And here we have Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be a truth teller so much, the opposite. But, this brings up something very important to bring up, which is he does have a pretty strong position of Haumea. It's right on the midpoint of his Jupiter Uranus trine, which is this kind of cleverness that he has, as well. But the thing with Haumea with him, the downside of Haumea can be self-righteousness. So I've seen that over and over again. This is just an example of it. But the thing is, it's a kind of a thin line between I'm really after what's right. I really want to do what's right. I really want to tell my truth versus my truth is the truth. I'm really wanting to tell you what's right for you, which is a mistake. So it can lead and it can bleed into this sort of like every planet has its negative manifestation. With Haumea, the negative manifestation seems to be this sense of I'm the only one that knows what's right. And of course, he's actually said that I alone can fix it. So that's an example for him, even though he has kind of a good, strong position of Haumea, he doesn't seem to be totally acting upon it if you have that attitude about him. Here's the challenger. Now, I thought Kamala Harris would have, she seems to have principles. She's always bringing up truth versus lies. She's always bringing up defending the underdog, and we have to have equity. We have to have people taken care of. And she does have pretty strong Haumea connecting also with Saturn elevated in her chart. It does connect to some of the other planets, personal planets, Mercury and the Sun. So I do feel like she's a principled person. She's trying to be. Question comes up with Edward Snowden. What was his motivation? I mean, some people think of him as a criminal. I think of him differently. I think that he was really motivated by his own intention of making things clear, making it known. And in his case, it's Makemake. You see, and he does have that activist. He did, sacrifice his life, changed his life utterly to bring forward the information that he thought was important for people to hear, that there was a lot of surveillance going on that people didn't realize. I do have also this is John Perry Barlow, who's a Grateful Dead lyricist who wrote this wonderful lyric. We don't own this place, although we act as if we did. It belongs to the children or our children's kids. The actual owners haven't even been born yet. But we never tend the garden and we rarely pay the rent. Most of it is broken and the rest of it is bent. Put it all on plastic and I wonder where we'll be when the bills hit. And so this is, we can run, but we can't hide from it. Of all possible worlds, we only got one. We got to ride on it. Whatever we've done, we'll never get far from what we leave behind. Baby, we can run, 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 but we can't hide. And that was part of the Grateful Dead repertoire he wrote with Bobby Weir, the musician. And sure enough, he does have pretty strong Haumea, as I suspected. This is a great quote. This is an important example chart, which I think I'll end with. Well, no, not quite end with. So this is Hannah Arendt, who was a philosopher born in 1906 in Germany. And during her late 20s, she was witnessing the rise of Nazi Germany. And here's what she wrote. This constant lying is not aimed at making the people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and to judge, is, without knowing it and without willing it, completely subjected to the rule of lies. With such a people, you can do whatever you want. So this is so telling for our times. It was published recently. I came across it because it was published on Facebook. And I wanted to see the chart. And I thought to myself, well, if she doesn't have strong Haumea, I don't know what I'm doing. And look what she's got. So we have the time of birth, and her rising is 8 degrees of Cancer. Her Haumea position is 8 degrees of Cancer. And she has Saturn opposite the moon at 9 degrees of Pisces and Virgo. And not only that, it connects to both Chiron, which is quincunx, and it connects as well to, it's a very close quintile to Mars, very close, within half a degree. So obviously she'd have strong Haumea with that attitude, right? That truth and lies matter, that if you are telling lies consistently and trying to make people confused what's true and what's not true, people are in trouble that way. Really, such a thing for our times. So I do want to close in these last 5 minutes here with some mundane astrology, because from February to September 2023, the new moons kept reflecting this strong Haumea Pluto square, partile square in the sky between 0 degrees of Scorpio and 0 degrees also of Aquarius, right? So Haumea with Pluto, that may raise a question about the downside of telling the truth. Are you going to be caught not telling the truth? And this was also when the lawsuit against Fox News, because there was this defamation lawsuit that was raised because Fox News was lying, and they were knowingly lie. It was shown that they, amongst themselves, understood that this person that was really promoting the idea that the Dominion voting machines had been sabotaged, perhaps programmed in Venezuela, that it was all bullshit nonsense, And so that was amongst themselves, but publicly they were supporting this position, saying, no, the election was fraudulent, which I don't believe it was. So there were so many court cases, but the $867 million settlement came about on this date. It was on April 18th, the day before this solar eclipse. And the solar eclipse was at 29 degrees, 50 minutes. There was the second, remember the second new moon in Aries. There was one at 0 degrees Aries, and then this was at 29:50. And so it was exactly opposite. You can see here's the current times, right? Here's the Haumea square to Pluto, which I think is really significant. And for our times, that we're trying to struggle with this question of truth and lies right now. And we have this eclipse touching it off, being directly opposite Haumea. And sure enough, this was on the 19th, and on the 18th was this huge settlement that Fox News had to pay. So I say Haumea is about telling the truth, doing the right thing, truth versus its reverse, all over the news, with Pluto a transformational effect on the society itself. And so I wanted to show a couple of these current charts. The attack on Israel, I'll leave you to look at in the PDF. It's interesting to me because the issue comes up, what's the right thing to do? I mean, obviously that was not the right thing to do. And then what's the response? So the response took place on the solar eclipse of the 14th of October, 2023. And we have, well, interestingly, the eclipse degree was 21:07 and 30 seconds. And the Chiron Eris was 21:07 and 46 seconds. So the Chiron Eris really comes up here, and that's been around for ever since then. And I think we're living through these very painful times. So something to think about. And it really does have to do with what is our purpose? What is our sense of the right thing to do? How are we going to move forward as a society? So I think that's very interesting. This is, as I say, right after the attack on Israel. So when the war started, the Gaza war. And this is the July 21st full moon. And before this full moon, I was saying, look out for this full moon, because it was at 29 degrees Capricorn, right next to Pluto at 0. And we had also still Haumea at 0. These are very slow moving, and the Haumea Pluto square is still active in our skies right now. So this full moon really touched it off. And I was saying, like 10 days before, Trump's in trouble. We're going to see lies exposed somehow. And I didn't know how. I thought maybe one of the court cases would get life again. But it turned out that was the day that Biden gave up the ghost and pushed Kamala Harris into position where she became, the prosecutor versus the felon, as they say. And she's doing kind of the deed there. So election day coming up, just to illustrate that, we do have Mars showing up at 0 degrees of Leo. So opposed Pluto at almost 0 degrees of Aquarius. And still within a couple of degrees, we have the Haumea square. So I think this is powerful for what's happening on election day. And we might want to reflect on the fact that Mars is about to retrograde. So by December 6th, this is November 5th, the beginning of the election polls on the polls. So on December 6th, Mars stations retrograde at 6 degrees. So it's pretty far off the opposition to Pluto, but it moves back to the 0 degree mark by January 3rd. And we are going to have this big date coming up of January 6th, 2025, which is when the election results get certified. So I'll end with that. That might be something for the questions I don't know. Here's the book I wrote about Eris, the 10th planet. And then here is the TimePassages software. And remember, I do have these interpretations for Haumea and Makemake in the houses and in connection to the planets. And those are all in the shipping software, which you can get with a KeplerCollege discount for 30% off. So that's available to you, and write that coupon number down. You can use that at the Astrograph software site. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Henry. That was amazing. We have a lot of chat going on. People were really interested in the charts, and we have quite a few questions for you.
Sure.
Before we start, I want to say thank you for sharing the code for your software with everyone in this webinar. And if you're a KeplerCollege student, you know that we have these discount codes, promotional codes for all of our students. Henry was kind enough to share it with everyone who is here today. So if you are wanting to get TimePassages, you now have some extra motivation and a code. Do you want to do questions first, Henry, and then look at someone's chart? We actually pulled a chart from the registrants, and we have somebody lined up and ready to go for
All
Henry to
right.
look at his chart.
Yeah, let's do the questions first, right?
Okay, sounds good. The first question is, well, we had a few people asking, what orbs do you use?
Well, you'd think that with Eris being such a slow-moving planet, I've had this question before. Gee, would we use a much tighter orb? And I do, as far as the transiting, I use a 1 degree instead of a 2 degree as far as the date range in the time passage software for the transiting date range. But as far as the personal planets, though, they move at their usual speeds. So I just use the regular orbs for connections to the for the rest of the planets in the chart.
Okay, so a smaller orb for the KBOs and then
Well,
regular.
no, for Eris in transit, I use a 1 degree orb because it's such a slow moving thing. It does take a long time to go even 1 degree on either side, but that's only in the transiting date range. As far as looking at a natal chart, you really don't need to do anything different as far as your orbs because, you know, there's Eris and there's the sun, and they might be 5 degrees off, but it's still square.
Got it. What do you think about the KBOs or Eris specifically taking on rulership of a sign?
I don't. I mean, though it was suggested that now that we have Pluto as the modern ruler of Scorpio, leaving Mars to Aries, that maybe Venus wouldn't be ruling two signs, and maybe we should say Eris rules Libra, but I don't buy it because it's not a balanced kind of a thing. It's more of a one side, it's more of a jam ahead is Eris. So I really don't. So I think maybe these modern planets don't have to have a rulership. I mean,
Leave the
21st
theme of
century.
Mundi intact. And okay, next question is, and I think you might have covered this already, but the question is about if one of these dwarf planets is conjunct the ascendant or the midheaven.
Absolutely. Makes it very important. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times I see Haumea, a few times it's happened recently, right near the ascendant. And I said, oh, you always tell the truth. It gets me in so much trouble.
Do you, in your book, do you talk about more specifically interpreting them in a chart?
Which book? The new book?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a new book coming. And I've gotten a few chapters so far. Um, yes, I do. Um, Now, I'm more clear. I gave you those guidelines for interpreting Eris in a chart. I'm really clear about that. I'm not quite so clear about the Haumea Makemake, except just as a general influence of telling the truth, being true to yourself, knowing what your moral commitment is, knowing how to treat other people. Those I find that, they're very refreshing people. And when I say they, I mean, if they do have it on the ascendant, or if they do have it conjunct a personal planet, or several planets, you can see when there's a strong one. And I really do find that they have this kind of moral quality to them, and they're really great people, the kind of people that they really respect you, and they treat you nice, and they know who they are. They don't be namby-pamby or anything, but it's not like they're putting themselves down, but they also respect others, and it's really a kind of a refreshing person that you're in across with both Makemake and Helmi.
okay. And then if Eris doesn't aspect anything in a chart, do you read it alone or does it need to aspect something?
Well, if Eris is unaspected, I think that does what they say about an unaspected planet is it's there and it's lurking, and maybe it'll come up when you don't expect it to. It's not so integrated. And I would say the same, of course. And what I started to say about Hame and Makemake is I do have in that software interpretations for each position with the planets, and it will be published in the new book. So I do have that written down actually, but I don't have the guidelines that I did for yours.
Great. Yeah. I mean, it's new, so I think a lot of people are looking for, oh, how do I interpret in this situation or that situation?
Right. And I've gotten pretty good feedback on the interpretations that I wrote, just based on the house, what the meaning of the house is, what the meaning of the planet is. Yeah.
Okay. This one is about the nodes when one of the KBOs is connected to the north or south node.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now with the South Node, it's different, but with the North Node, I really find that it's important. I mean, just like any other planet that would be conjunct the North Node, this brings it out as an important factor in life. Now, with the South Node, it's more that it's in the background, as you would expect with the South Node, that it's something that may hold us back. It's something that we're used to, it's not really part of our evolution, but it's part of our past, really.
Okay. Is the is Eris associated with visionaries and cycle breakers or pioneers in a chosen field?
I would say doesn't have to be. It's a strong, it brings that planet out strongly. So yes, it could be for sure. I wouldn't say always, although with the sun, I saw that quite a bit with leaders, like feminist leaders. So yeah, I mean, to me, the extent of cycle breaker versus um, participant that's also got their head on straight and they're kind of looking, there's all different ways to, you don't have to be a rebel to be a change agent.
Okay. This question is about Ceres as a dwarf planet. Do you use it in your work, in your research?
You know, my opinion is that, excuse me just a minute, I'm gonna clear my throat. So my opinion is that the astronomers don't have the final word on things, that I don't think of Ceres really any different now that it's got a little extra crunch. I mean, I think the four feminine asteroids are important the same way they always were. Don't neglect Juno and Pallas Athena and Vesta. I mean, I think that they are important, but I haven't done much work with Ceres differently than I ever did before.
Okay. In a chart, if one of these dwarf planets aspects the part of fortune, do you read that? Do you bring the part of fortune into that as an aspect?
I think you could. I mean, I haven't actually, to tell you the truth, done any research on that. I don't remember noticing that in any of the charts. I would think it might be significant.
Okay. This question relates to the Mary Oliver chart and the square between her Haumea and Mercury. Wouldn't you normally see this square as a tension?
Okay, this is important. This is interesting. I think squares are really important between personal planets. Moon square Venus is very different from moon trine Venus, moon sextile Venus. However, let's just talk about Pluto. If Pluto is square or Pluto is trine, it's still the elephant in the room. You're still dealing with Pluto. And whereas there's a bit of a uh, maybe easier integration involved with a trine than with a square, I do think that any way around, it's still connecting to that archetype. And so I really don't distinguish when I see Haumea square Mercury. I don't feel like that's a conflict. I feel like Haumea is coming in maybe very direct way. And like I say, this person that I have as an example who's got not only the partile connection, which is a square between Mercury and Haumea, it's to the minute. And they're writing all these nature books. It's like their work is in front of them and they know what it is, and it's to connect people with nature. So I don't
Okay,
see the square as a deficit, really.
thank you. Do you interpret Eris in retrograde? Do you have like a different type of approach
I
to that?
don't much, that's another thing. In the outer planets, I don't much distinguish between retrograde and not retrograde. Although I think you could. I think you could say, but to me, it's an overlay. I mean, to me, again, the most important thing is this major archetype that's just there, and whether it happens to be moving backwards, which they do half the time, kind of. I mean, they say that moving backwards could be more internal in its manifestation. I haven't really focused on that much, but you could make that, but to me, it's a secondary layer versus just the presence of the archetype.
Okay. And do you work with octaves? There's examples here from the question, like Sedna Ceres Moon or Makemake Uranus Mercury. Um,
Well, I've heard people say that. I'm on a little bit of a different track. Excuse me. Um, I don't really see, I mean, I do see a connection between Uranus and Makemake in the fact that Makemake is more activist and Uranus is kind of this rebellious nature. I do see a connection between Neptune and Haumea in the fact that Haumea has this really spiritual side to it. It's a way of seeing the mystical side of life. But I don't necessarily regard that as a higher octave. I think of them as quite different from the traditional outer planets, the modern planets. I see them as, we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, very important still as a triumvirate in terms of modern planets as we understand them. And then we also have Eris, Haumea, and Makemake as these new 21st century planets that really have a lot to share about what is happening in the current zeitgeist. And I just feel like they're kind of their own thing.
and the last question, and hopefully I'll get this right, Scott. So if I don't, you can pop more information in. But Scott is saying that there's no real consensus about what each of the dwarf planets mean. So what do you think about, others' definition, I guess, or how it's coming together, the definition of these new KBOs?
I think that's up to each individual to explore for themselves. I haven't spent a lot of time, like I remember looking at one book that said, "Oh my gosh, Makemake and Uranus are so related, and look at this chart." And I looked at the chart example, and it had strong Uranus. So, I mean, it's bad to just use one example. I haven't, the answer is I don't know. I haven't really looked too much at what other people are doing. I've been concentrating on my own research, and I really feel strongly about the connection to nature, both through the mythology that they have. I know it's a bit odd that there's two planets with the same meaning, which I think is very strange. And I know people have a question mark there. I do distinguish the two meanings a little bit, as you could see from my presentation. But I'm really been on this understanding of nature connection as not only what the mythology tells me, what the research tells me, because I've been, like I say, well, Hannah Arendt's a good example. I saw that Facebook post, Hannah Arendt. She says truth and lies. She says right and wrong, judgment. You've got to know what's going on. And I thought to myself, so prescient, so important for our times, so connected to this concept that I see as this archetype that's emerging in our times of Haumea, and it's all over her chart. I mean, I do feel like I'm really onto something with at least one core aspect of the meaning of these new 21st century planets. Like I say, the ones that are officially named is the ones that I've been working with.
Okay. Well, now, do you want to look at a chart from someone from
Yes,
the
I think
audience?
that's so fun. And we have 50 minutes left. I think that's so fun to look at a couple of charts if we can, just to see how that comes out in terms of dialogue, if somebody's chart is, if they're
I
also here.
they're here. I just gave James the ability to speak, I think.
Okay. All right.
And if you're ready, Henry, to open your software, I can give you the information. So for those of you in the audience, Henry's actually going to look at the chart of someone here in the audience that was randomly selected, and will show you how he approaches looking at a chart and these planets, these dwarf planets. So stick with us, and we're going to pull the chart up right now.
So I'm going to bring up my software, the TimePassages software. And here's the current chart by chance. And if you'll give me the data,
Okay, July 3rd, 1975.
how about, do I have a name?
James,
James, okay. And July 3rd.
1975,
And you have the time?
11:50 p.m.
Gee, it's 11:47.
And this person is born in Turkey. So I'm going to give
Oh,
you the, yeah, it'll be Niged, Nigde, in the country Turkey.
oh, good. It came up. All right.
Okay, so we have
Here we
James.
here we have
He,
James's chart.
yes, he's
And
on.
he's a good example. Guess what? Because he has Eris right in the first house. So I would say to
Um,
James, yes, go
Henry,
ahead.
I'm not yet seeing the chart, so I think you might have to stop sharing and re.
Oh, yo, yeah, right. Oh, you're right. Um, about that.
Yes.
So, a couple things appear immediately. One is that Eris is right there in the first house, although in Aries, not the rising degree. So if you're using whole sign houses, would be different. And then the other thing is that Eris is also in the quincunx aspect to Haumea, which does automatically kind of enhance the Haumea, especially if we have. Now I can do a command click on the planet, and then you can see just the aspects. And it does, Haumea does connect to the sun. It connects to, this is a septile within 1/10 of a degree with Saturn. And, I didn't mention it, but Haumea with Saturn is a little bit of that defending the underdog too, fairness. And then what do we have? Uranus, it's within a degree. It's a semi-square to Uranus within a degree. So I think this is a pretty strong example of Haumea in the chart. And you know what I would say? And is James there to talk?
James is not able to talk, but he's right there standing by on chat, so he can
Oh,
respond.
he can chat. Well, James, I just see that, in the sixth house, that's a sense of service. I see you as a kind of a stand-up guy that really feels like being there for people, that you have a sense of fairness. Well, for one thing, I think you probably love pets. You probably love nature, being in nature. I mean, of course, a lot of people say that. I love being in nature. But I think nature is especially important to you. And I really feel like you have this sense of fairness that really is very charming. Like people like you for it. In other words, you don't pull your punches. You come across as somebody that really cares about other people and their needs as well as being stand up for yourself. You're not fading away and just saying somebody else, somebody else. You're saying I'm me, here I am, but you're also saying it's important to me who you are.
Okay, so how does that sound to you, James? And he did ask if there was something that indicates a life purpose that you see in that.
Okay, good point. Well, what I say about Eris is it really relates to who you are at depth, what your attention is at depth, and having it near the ascendant in terms of Placidus houses. I feel like there is a strong sense of life purpose in terms of figuring out who you are, shining your light. We also need to look at Chiron for these matters, and Chiron is with Mars and Jupiter. So there's a little bit of a fear of taking your power. So that comes up. As you grow, you leave that sort of prior conditioning behind. You can start to just be yourself, and that's very important for you. And it's part of your life purpose is to explore who the heck you really are, you, and how you can actualize, how you can actually manifest uh, the beauty of your vision for life and for others in terms of how you can just shine and manifest that. That's your, I think that's part of your soul intention.
Okay. He says, yes, it sounds like all of this is resonating well with them.
Okay.
We have another chart if you want to look at one more, or do you need
Let's do one more. It's so fun to do these interactively in the moment and get their reactions. So
okay. Oh, he says I'm trying to overcome my emotional mostly. So great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your chart with the group. We have one more. I'm going to find you, Celine, and I'm going to click the button that allows you to talk. So if you have your mic working,
is Celine spelled like this?
it's Celyne. Celyne.
Okay.
And go November this 24th, 1956. And Celine, you want to try out your mic and see if we can hear you?
What time?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
What's your time?
Pardon?
What time we need?
What time what?
What time were you born?
Oh, I wrote that down right above just I'm French, so my English is not perfect.
Oh, here we go. I found it. 6:15
Yeah,
a.m.
6:15 a.m. and I put the west and north latitude.
Where are we
on
now?
Quebec, Canada.
Oh, Quebec. Okay.
But I wrote down here the latitude and longitude right beside the time of my birth on the right side. Can you see it?
Well, hopefully
Yes.
it's going to match up what we come up with here.
Okay.
If I can spell, we'll be all
I have
right.
your book, by the way. I love it. I just love
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, what we have is 4649 north, 7114 east. Is that right? I mean, 7114 west.
Yes, 7334 west and 45 north, 27.
Oh, okay. So you're near Quebec, basically.
Yeah, well, Montreal. I was born in downtown Montreal. Verdun. Verdun is a suburb of.
Oh, you didn't tell me Montreal. You told me Quebec.
No. It was in Quebec, the province, but the city is Montreal. Well, Verdun. It's well, now it's all Montreal, they call it, but it was a little suburb.
Yeah, now I got it. Like 7334, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we have in this chart? Take a minute to glance through it here. Well, there is, by the way, a grand trine. These are great example charts, just by chance. Isn't that great? It just came about. A grand trine between Eris, Mercury, and Uranus. Well, this is very characteristic. Okay, so we would say now, anytime you see Eris with Mercury, it's always a great fountain of ideas. It's always somebody that can talk about so many things all at once that people can get confused. And you have to be a little bit more sensitive to that sometimes than you might ordinarily be. You can kind of leave them flying off at the curve there. But with the Eris, so okay, I would say you're a writer. I would say that you're a writer of new things. You want to bring the new idea. You don't want the old idea. The old idea is so far in the rearview mirror. Forget it. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about what's coming. Let's talk about what's possible. This is all about possibility, right? So let's forget about the limitations. Now you're all aware of the limitations. So you have Saturn also with Mercury, so you do have a strong sense of practicality, what could work, what couldn't work, the boundaries, but you love to break the boundaries. You love to
Well,
try.
I just cannot stand people that hurt children. I get very upset with that. And people that tells lies, I just feel them, and it makes my heart turn upside down. It just,
Aw,
yeah. So I'm all for justice, but the justice that we have in our world right now, I think it's going crazy.
for
I
sure.
wish it would go otherwise. I can see so much the light because I do a lot of meditation, and many times it could be weird, but I ask questions and I do have answers.
Uh-huh.
And,
Your own unique answers.
pardon?
Your
Pardon me?
own your own answers. Your own unique answers.
Yeah, well, what I ask sometimes, I do ask for what's going on in this world, not only my world, but the world of humankind on the planet Earth at this present time, what's going on.
I think what you're saying is, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I always wonder, what can I do
Uh-huh.
to help it, because there are so many people that do not know so many things, and I just
Yeah,
and
what's
then
going on with those people, right? What the heck?
how come they don't see that? How
I
come it's
know,
not
I get that.
just
I get that a
them?
lot.
It's
I feel
just
that too. I really feel that too. So here's your Haumea configuration. You
okay.
do,
I wanted to know
you
that.
do have Haumea with Neptune, with Venus, and connected also. This is a square to the sun. So this is the strong Haumea that corresponds to what you're saying about what the heck, why can't people treat each other right?
Oh, if you only knew.
So that makes sense to me. I mean, you have, this is such an
I'm
interesting
gonna
chart.
take a
The
picture.
grand trine with Mercury, Uranus. So are you a writer? Do you write?
No, but I'm thinking about it.
Oh yeah, I think you should. I think you have a
Okay.
lot to share.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought, because I got so mad all of my life, it was just I could see so many things, and I thought even as a child I could see things, and I would try to interrupt adults and say, "Why do you say that when it's not true?" And I would get punished all the time, and yeah. Anyway,
Well, so don't listen to those naysaying voices. You have to be yourself.
yeah. I
And
just want to.
you do have Chiron right on the trine. The close trine you have between Eris and Mercury has a midpoint with Chiron. So Chiron holds you back. Chiron is that naysaying, that maybe there was criticism growing up.
Yeah,
You
a lot,
you're not as smart as you think you are, young
a
lady.
lot.
And
Well,
so,
women were not important where I was raised, because my mom comes from a family of 13 children. She was
oh,
the 13th one, so you can imagine, because she was squished a lot. So women were not important, and all her sisters, uh, they were raised like only the men were important. So it was, and I was the only girl in my
Oh, really?
between two brothers. So, and I lost one at he killed himself at 20 years old. So
Oh,
it was
sorry.
hard.
Well, I think, with the hardship and with the lack of support, you have to grow your own sense of self and your own sense of purpose. And of course, you're learning that. And I think that's what's holding you back from writing. You should write.
Yeah, okay. I was in my apartment and working for the city. I was 16 years old.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
You've got a great chart. Your chart is so fascinating. I mean, you have so much going on.
Mm.
Very positive.
I'm trying to
Okay.
stay positive. Yeah.
Well, you can do it. You can definitely do it.
Okay, so I would be good as a writer.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great charts. Oh my God.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This is a special thing that we haven't done before, at least since I've been with Kepler. So this was exciting to look at live charts.
It's
I
so
just
cool,
wanted-
isn't it, to have the person just talking about it.
It really is. It really is. So thank you, Henry, for doing that. Thank you for a
Thank you.
very informative webinar. Thank you to everyone for joining us, staying a bit later. We will get the replay posted on our YouTube channel. We'll get an email out to you with the replay later this week. And look at this lovely software. You have the discount. You can go buy TimePassages and have this on your computer.
Oh, I'll show you just
So it was-
quickly. I can click on this planet and then it says, Haumea in the ninth house, the consciousness that there is more to this world than meets the eye.
Yeah, I can see that clearly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. Hope you guys did. And I like to get this information out to people.
Yes, yes. And if you're a student with Kepler, we are going to make some instructional videos for using TimePassages, and that will be in our library. So if you're looking for more on how to use TimePassages, we'll have more for you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to end the webinar now. Henry, I'll get to you with an email to follow up. So
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.